The County Seat is brought to you this week by Jones & DeMille Engineering, helping to shape your quality of life. Find out more at jonesandemille.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the County Seat. Bonus, last week we talked to William Perry Pendley, and he agreed to spend another half hour because there's so many important public land issues that the West is facing, not only presently, but in the short or near term going forward. So we decided that we would continue this conversation and explore this a little bit further. Thank you for spending the extra time with us.
You bet. My pleasure.
Okay. So, in our last exciting episode, we left our heroes talking about the broad range of problems. But we set this up to talk about this permanent bureaucracy and how administrations really need to work at getting one guy in, getting him in quickly, and giving him enough time for the policy and the hires and everything to filter down. What do you see as some of the problems with the permanent bureaucracy? How do you get so one-sided in an agency with their career path people that don't change when the administration changes? And what do you do to fix it?
Well, we have three problems. The one problem is in the Bureau of Land Management, and so you have 10,000 employees. Most of them in the Mountain West. 99.99% of the Bureau of Land Management's 245 million acres is in the Mountain West in Alaska. And so these are the people who run it. And, you get one political appointee come in with a handful of staff, and they're supposed to guide that monster. And in my experience, I thought in my 18 months to running the Bureau of Land Management for President Trump, they were very responsive. And they tried to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. And, it took us to be tough. We had to be tough. But at the end of the day, I think most of the employees of the Bureau of Land Management, they're out there, they're working on grazing, they're working on logging, they're working to permit energy development, wind and solar, as well as oil and gas. And they're committed to what they do. They're very knowledgeable. And when you work with them, they want to be successful. And so you have that, but you also have, in any government, you have the Office of Management and Budget, which is a huge bureaucracy. And every regulation, every policy change has to go through the OMB. And I remember fighting with the OMB when I was with Reagan, and I come into the Trump administration. I went into an OMB meeting, and we got done with it. It was a terrible darn meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I said, I'm glad in the 4 decades I've been away, the OMB hasn't changed. And my reaction with the Office of Management and Budget when I was with Reagan, same thing with Trump, was, do these guys work for the President of the United States? They really know what the President's trying to get accomplished? Because you couldn't tell it from my experience in working with the OMB.
This is fascinating. I have never heard this before, but I don't get that much of a chance to talk to high-level administrators.
We try to get regulations through, and what we do, we'd write the regulations, go over to OMB. OMB would mark it up, and they'd have questions. Okay, fine, you got questions, and come back, and we'd put our experts, career people who know what they're doing, and we'd say, okay, how do we respond to these questions from the OMB? And we'd respond, we'd send them back, and the OMB would come back with the same darn questions. We'd do it 3 or 4 times. And meanwhile, the clock's running. The meter's running on our time.
Do you think it's intentional?
No, I believe it's intentional. Absolutely, I believe it's intentional. And I think the next president, Republican president that comes in, probably ought to fire all the people in the Office of Management and Budget. The third leg of the stool that I want to mention is the Department of Justice. They have an expression over to the Department of Justice, and those are all career people. And they when they refer to the Department of Justice, they say it's 2 words, just us. And it's totally focused on them. When you go to Washington, and I used to represent for 30 years, I represented pro bono people fighting the federal government. Mm-hmm. And so I'd go in, on behalf, I wouldn't charge my clients, didn't charge my clients, and I'd go in on behalf of my clients, and I'd go over to BLM and I'd say, what are you guys doing in litigation? And I'd go to BLM and say, what the heck are you guys doing? And they say, Perry, we're just doing what the lawyers tell us. So I'd go across the street to the Justice Department and say, what are you guys doing? And they say, hey, Perry, we're just doing what the client tells us to do. You know, one of these guys is confused. And so,
or dishonest.
Or dishonest. So you get those entrenched bureaucracies, and it's really tough to turn them around. And I think there's a natural tendency to bring in Attorney General of the United States, and I'm not speaking about anyone in particular, but they want to support their people. And they want to support their people. But they got to realize who their people are. The President of the United States, he's calling the shots. Secretary of the Interior is speaking on behalf of the President of the United States. And when we have a matter that needs to go to court to win, then they got to win. They got to do it.
Now, this is a very interesting perspective that you're giving. But if you were to go out into like Rangeley, Colorado, or drop into Nampa, Idaho, or anywhere in rural Utah and sit down and talk with ranchers and county commissioners and the likes, they would say, well, I'm not sure that the bureaucrats really are on our side, even at the ground level. I mean, there's some good people out in the field, but there are a lot that they feel are really opposed to the traditional values of the West. What say you?
Well, I understand that, and I can only speak for what we did and what I did when I was there. And I come from working for a United States Senator, my senator from Wyoming, working on the House Resources Committee when it was the House Interior and Insular Affairs Committee, working for the Reagan administration, 30 years representing these people, and now working for the Trump administration. And I can say what we did. And what we did was we made all the efforts we could to bring the agency consistent with the law and the needs of Westerners to have a living. And whether it's oil and gas or grazing or logging or mining or recreation, we sought to make that happen. And we did the best we could.
So I do what you referred to your pro bono legal work. And I think it's important for the viewers to understand what it is that you've been engaged in that 2.5 decades between your time with Reagan and your time with Trump. Tell us a little bit about the Rocky Mountain Legal Foundation.
Well, it's called the Mountain States Legal Foundation. I was there nearly 30 years. And it was an organization started essentially by Joe Coors from Coors Brewing. And he hired a young lawyer named Jim Watt, who went on to be Secretary of the Interior, to start this organization to ensure that people in the Mountain West, if they had a problem with the United States government and they wanted to go to court, they had to go to court to defend their rights, defend the Constitution and the rule of law, that somebody would be their lawyer. And so Jim was there from 77 to 81, and I came in 89, and I was there until December of 2018. And I did that. And I took an organization, candidly, that was on the verge of bankruptcy, and took it to $10 million in the bank, in the bank, its own building, and 4 trips to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Now, it's interesting you talk about that, because one of our pet subjects on a decade of the county seat has been the Equal Access to Justice Act, which was supposed to be the government's version of trying to do exactly what it sounds like the Mountain States Legal Foundation was doing, is provide relief for the small guy who has to go up against the federal government. Did EJA awards ever go to?
No, yeah. Well, we did collect some, but not as much as we should have, because the bar, not to go too inside baseball on us here, but the bar is that the government's position to be able to say no, we don't have to pay you, is the government's position has to be, quote, substantially justified. And that sounds like, oh, wow, that's a high bar. No, it's a very low bar. Essentially, if the government has some argument as to why it tried to screw over some rancher, then we're denied our Equal Access to Justice Act funds. But instead, those monies have gone to all these environmental groups.
And that's precisely my point.
Exactly.
In trying to figure this out is there are income caps and there are all these different things that the original act had in it.
Yes.
That were supposed to make it literally for the little guy, and yet I've got figures once out of settlements for it, and the Sierra Club, which is not a little organization, made $12 million 1 year.
Oh, exactly. It's a cash cow for these left-wing groups. Karen Budd Fallon, who worked for the Trump administration, has done a number of articles on it about how the money is flowing to these organizations. They really don't represent clients. They say, oh, we want to sue over waters of the United States, so let's go out and find somebody that we can represent.
Like a deer?
Yeah, like a deer, or the trees. But in my case, people come to me and say, Perry, we're getting really hurt by this waters of the United States policy. Can you represent us, because we're not going to be able to build this pond, or they're going to try to send us to jail because I built a stock pond. And so we'd represent them. And so Cynthia Loomis, who was Congresswoman from Wyoming and now the senator from Wyoming, she tried to get the law changed, but the law needs to change for sure.
Interesting. What other problems do you think you see with this permanent bureaucracy? What do we need to do to protect the traditional values of the West, along with all of the other? I mean, we're talking about logging and ranching and mineral extraction, things that are good for America,
right?
And to a certain degree, they're good for air quality. If you look at fires and things, and so there is that balance of environmental protection and resource management. My uncle was a rancher in Wyoming. And he was one of the best conservationists I ever knew as a little kid.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, loggers always said this: every day is Earth Day for a logger, because they're essentially growing a crop. They're managing a crop. One of my friends, I represented loggers a lot against Earth First and against the Forest Service, and trying to prevent wildfires and to have a sustainable economy locally. And they'd often go to Washington to meet with federal officials. And one of them came back one time. I said, well, how was your meetings? Well, I had some good meetings. I said, what was the craziest thing you heard in Washington? And I'd say, of course, it's young kids like I used to be, working for these senators, members of Congress. And so you go in and meet with these young kids who are running things. And one of them, one of the foresters or loggers from the West was in one of these meetings, said, now, when trees die, and the kid says, trees die? That was like, wow, that's new information. Well, of course they do. And they get old, they get diseased, and then they get infected with pine beetle, and then they die. And then we have a forest fire. And if we're not actively harvesting our timbers, and we're not actively getting rid of pinyon juniper, if we're not actively getting rid of hazardous fuel buildup, then we're going to have the terrible fires we're having. And that's one of the initiatives that Trump came up with. He flew out and saw Governor Newsom and sat down with Governor Newsom in September 14, 15 of 2020, and said, Governor, you got to cut your trees, for gosh sakes, and reduce hazardous fuels. And what's happening now is this is a good example, because what the Greens, what the Biden administration is telling everybody, it's climate change. Climate change, that's why everything's burning up. No, it isn't. 3 things every school kid will tell you. What makes a fire? Heat, oxygen, and fuel. Mm-hmm. And if you remove the fuel, I don't care how hot it gets, it's not going to burn up. And so when we have this fuel out there that's not treated, that's not taken care of, then that's the problem we're going to have. And so the American people generally don't understand these Western issues. They don't understand that every day is Earth Day for a rancher, somebody who has to turn his cattle out on a BLM allotment or on his own property. He's going to manage that land to be sustainable, because he's going to want to turn them out next year and the year after that. And he wants his kids and grandkids to be able to turn them out. And so most American people, they don't understand that. And so our big challenge as Westerners is, how do we help communicate that to people in Washington, D.C., and not hear the siren call of these crazy environmental policies that the Greens are pushing.
This is a good point for us to take a break. I've already got my question lined up for when we come back. We'll be right back with the county seat. William Perry Pendley is our guest. This is a great conversation. Stay with us. The county seat as we know it is coming to an end. Our last television broadcast will be September 26th and 27th. Be sure to tune in. The last episodes are full of fire and information. But the county seat will continue. We are going underground. We will be talking very directly, very frankly, about the problems that affect local government and your life as a citizen of the United States of America. We will have interesting guests, in-depth dialogue, and very little commercial. Join us for County Seat Underground. You can get to it through our website, www.thecountyseat.tv, and it will be available in all kinds of streaming broadcasts. It all starts right now, the County Seat Underground. Check it out. That's over. You still here? We're done. See you underground.
Hi everyone. Have you ever wondered if the beef that we feature on AYL is as good as we say? Well, why don't you try one of our delicious sample boxes from butter-steaks.com. They are absolutely delicious and they're tender and juicy. Delivered directly from the ranch right to your door from butter-steaks.com. If you're gonna eat grass-fed beef, put the very best on your table. Yardley's premium beef from butter-steaks.com. You ready to eat, kids?
Yeah! I got to ramble in Beaver County, Utah, where I rode a trail under the big blue skies and didn't see anyone else. Where I cooled off in a stream, which made me and my mom and grandma laugh so hard. This is Ramblers. It's always been Utah. Ramble responsibly for future generations, like me.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are continuing a conversation. Well, I would say the show should be an hour long. We were at a point of energy independence on January 1st. We're now in August, September, and the talk from Washington is that we're no longer energy independent, and we're begging OPEC to increase their allotments. What happened?
Well, the American people voted for Joe Biden, I guess, and Joe Biden made it very clear. He made it very clear he was going to get rid of fracking, and he came in with this radical leftist agenda that we got to save the planet. We're running out of time, and we got to stop with fossil fuels. And he refuses to do what Congress has told him to do, which is issue oil and gas leases 4 times a year on Bureau of Land Management lands. And he's canceled already 2 sales. He's about to cancel a 3rd sale here in August, and it's going to be a disaster.
Well, so people look at that. I mean, you know, there will be some pushback on this because people will say, well, yes, but leases take years to develop, and they're pumping oil out of the ground right now. They're pulling coal out. There's still stuff happening. How come the gas prices have shot up? And some detractors will say, well, that's just a market commodity. It's not that the supply is being affected. Well,
the prices have shot up because people are looking down the road and they're seeing this scarcity coming. You're right. We achieved energy independence for the first time in 2019, first time in 75 years. It was something Reagan wanted to get done. The naysayers said it will never happen, and Trump ensured that it would happen. And so you talk on a more local scale. If you're in these counties that have 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the land is owned by the United States government, then you got to find a way to make a job out of that. And in a lot of our rural counties, it's oil and gas, or it might be coal. You take a look at the Permian Basin down in New Mexico. It's a rich area of oil and gas, has a great future, and the leases that are issued now that would have been issued in January, would have been issued in May, are the seed corn for the development down the road, because these are prospects that are being put together by what we call wildcatters, and they're planning for the future and hoping to make that big discovery that that everybody dreams about making, that we need to replace these other fields that are dying out. And what's happened in New Mexico is you have the Permian Basin that's in New Mexico and Texas. On the New Mexico side, it's mostly federal land. On the Texas side, it's private land. And so what all the oil and gas guys and gals are doing down in Texas is, and down in the Permian, is they're going into Texas because they know the curtain is closing because of Biden on oil and gas on public land. And it's a disaster. 30% of the money that goes into schools in New Mexico comes from oil and gas development.
It would be very similar here in Utah.
Exactly. And so it's critically important. And we're talking about this catastrophe in Afghanistan, and that Biden has created. If there was a time we sent sons and daughters to war to ensure we had energy supplies, under Trump that day was no more, because we had the supplies and we could act geopolitically without regard to, oh, that country, we need them for energy. No, we could act in our own national, America first, second and third, in our own national interest without regard to how much energy we got from them, because we didn't need them. And now, as you saw with President Biden, he's gone hat in hand to OPEC and said, please, oh please, Obi-Wan Kenobi, help us out. Send us energy because we're not developing it on our own land. It's a crime, and it's a terrible crime. And we're going to have elderly this coming winter who are going to have to make a choice between fuel or food. We have people on the Navajo reservation, and our new Secretary of the Interior says she cares so much about our American Indians, and yet they're facing that same decision. If energy prices going through the ceiling, inflation taking food through the ceiling, how do they make a decision? And it shouldn't be that way. And we should have cheap, affordable energy for the American people.
From your perspective, how much do you think that the energy situation and the fact that, I just look at our small operation with 2 television shows. We drive all over the state. It made a significant difference in the last 7 months on us being able to get around, and the amount of our resources we have to put into just showing up somewhere. And we're starting to pull in our belt.
Oh, absolutely.
How much of other industries and the inflation that you're seeing across the board is stemming from that transportation and delivery problem?
Well, I'm no expert on it, but I think a lot of it's going on, and shutting down with the pandemic and the shortages that we're seeing, and the fear that this president is trying to instill in the American people, fear of COVID, fear of white supremacists, all this silly nonsense coming out of the White House. We don't have a real leader coming out of the White House and helping us get through these challenging times. We face dark days ahead as far as I'm concerned, and I wish the Republicans would stop lecturing us on what Biden's trying to do to us. We got eyes, we can see. We see what they're doing. So my question is, what are the Republicans going to do about it? And the American people need to wise up. And this is a fascinating thing. It's slightly off topic, but I think with regard to schools, the racial divisiveness that's coming from the President of the United States, and the critical race theory that's being taught in our schools, locally, the American people are awakening, and they're fighting back against critical race theory because they realize that it creates, and this is a case I argued at the Supreme Court back in 1994-95, that we have an oppressor class and we have a victim class. We don't have classes like that in America. We are all Americans. In the eyes, Justice Scalia said in the case I won at the Supreme Court, in the eyes of government, we're just one race here. It is American. And we have a president that doesn't believe that. And that's a terrible thing, but I think the American people, certainly at the local level, on school boards, are fighting back.
Do you think that's going to change things going forward, or are you fearful that enough people, because of the way media in general is reacting, they won't know about it and it will go unnoticed until we've slipped down the slope too far?
Well, you look at your suburban moms that reportedly were troubled with President Trump and helped President Biden get elected. They go in to fill up their SUV and they're paying $100 to get a tank of gas. They see their husband being attacked because he's a white supremacist, because he's a white guy competing for a job. And they see their kids going to school and being told that because they're of a certain race, they're either a victim or an oppressor. And there's so many biracial families in our country today, and, so the dad is an oppressor and the mom is a victim, or the other way around. That's insane. When you think about Martin Luther King and what Martin Luther King said, that I dream of a day that my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And we're going 180 out the other way. It's a terrible time, and we need to fight back against it. And I think the American people are understanding that.
So what should people take from this conversation that we've had today? What is the action plan? As they say, what's your action plan? What's our call to action?
A friend of mine, Bruce Vincent, who is a lawyer that I represented in court many, many times from Libby, Montana, he's always said the world is run by those who show up. You need to show up. And I think that's what the radical left has done. They've been very, very successful at it. They've taken over the entire country, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but
I don't believe
they've
you
taken
are.
over the government, they've taken over the mass media, they've taken over the corporations. You see American Express lecturing its employees about critical race theory and telling them Coca-Cola saying, be less white. What does that mean, be less white? That math is racist? Crazy stuff that they're telling us. And so we need to fight back against that, and I believe the American people are doing that very successfully, and got to make it happen. And I think I know the media lied to us during the 4 years of the Trump administration. All the fictions that they told. I
guess you would know some of that firsthand.
I know a lot of that firsthand.
As you worked in the administration.
I know a lot of that firsthand. Yeah. And so they've been lying to us. So I think the American people are sort of saturated with that. I think they've reached critical mass from the standpoint of saying, you know what, I don't believe those people anymore, and turn that television off. And you look at the viewership for CNN, it's just gone through the floor because of the ability to beat up on Trump.
Do you think that there's a problem, and this is something that I've analyzed in working with local governments, and I see some alarming things even here. But it used to be that, particularly in rural America, that people would seek office with the idea that they were going to lead and they were going to convince and express their ideas and move people along. And I'm starting to see people going into that office, they're not motivated by the desire to lead, but the desire to rule. What would you say about that?
Well, I think if we've learned anything from the COVID, from the Wuhan virus, it's that the quick default position of people in charge is tyranny. I mean, you look at the shutdowns that we've seen, you look at the former governor of New York, governor of New Jersey, governor of Michigan, governor of Illinois, all across the country. You see these people who are in charge seizing the opportunity of a national pandemic to say, I'm going to tell you when you can go. I'm going to tell you when. And in the worst case scenario, look at what's happening in Australia. Can't even go outside.
Oh my gosh, I know. It's mind-boggling. Thank you so much for spending time with you. We've gone through another half hour. Please share these conversations. They're important with your family, with your friends, with people who live near and people who live far. This is important to you. Local government is where your life happens, and that's why we talk about these things on the county seat. We'll see you next week.